It was supposed to be just another night in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Leonard. Crystal lights shimmered above tables worth more than most people's rent, and whispers of billion-dollar deals floated through the air. Then, at 8:47 p.m., the doors burst open. Three men in black moved like predators through the crowd. Their target sat at the corner table, the powerful CEO Ethan Crowell. No security, no warning. For a heartbeat, silence hung between chaos and blood. Then someone moved. A man in a waiter's uniform stepped out from the shadows. His name was Lucas Ward. What happened next lasted only 4 seconds. By the time the sound of a broken glass echoed, all three attackers were on the ground, unconscious. The footage spread across the internet, 40 million views overnight. But what captivated the world was not the fight itself. It was the calm in Lucas's eyes. He didn't celebrate. He didn't speak. He just straightened his apron, as if saving a man's life was part of the job. The headlines called him a hero, but Lucas Ward never saw himself that way. When the world began searching for the mysterious waiter from the Leonard video, he disappeared into the same shadows he'd stepped out of. While talk shows debated his identity and news anchors romanticized his courage, Lucas was back in the dish pit, sleeves rolled up, eyes down, scrubbing away what fame tried to leave behind. At 36, Lucas had already lived several lifetimes. Once, he was the kind of man who could drop from a helicopter into darkness without fear. Navy SEAL Team 6. Years of missions that never made the news. His body still bore the silent marks of wars he wasn't allowed to speak about. His mind carried memories that never quite stayed asleep. But those scars were nothing compared to the one left by Claire. She had been light to his shadow, the calm to his storm. He met her after deployment, in a small bookstore where she worked weekends to pay for nursing school. She laughed at how awkward he was. And somehow, laughter became love. Then, 3 years ago, cancer came quietly, without permission. It stole her breath, her hair, and finally, her heartbeat. Lucas had faced death on battlefields across the world, but nothing compared to the helplessness of watching Claire fade from his arms. When the funeral ended and the flags were folded, he walked away from the military, not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. He traded his rifle for a rag, his camouflage for an apron. He didn't want to fight anymore. He wanted to protect something that still had a chance. That something was Lily, their daughter, with Claire's golden hair and his stubborn eyes. Their apartment in Queens was small but filled with laughter. Lucas worked nights at Leonard so he could walk Lily to school each morning. Every day followed a rhythm he never broke. Cook her breakfast, tie her shoes, kiss her forehead, and remind her that she was loved. After school, they did homework together until she fell asleep, pencil still in hand. It was a quiet existence, a fragile peace built between grief and hope. He never spoke about the military, not to coworkers, not even to Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who sometimes watched Lily when shifts ran late. To them, he was just Lucas the quiet one, always on time, never complaining, never raising his voice. But at night, when the city slept, the soldier inside him never did. Sometimes he woke gasping from dreams that weren't dreams at all, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Then he'd hear the soft snore from Lily's room, and the noise in his chest would quiet. Lucas Ward didn't want glory. He didn't want revenge. He wanted normal. But fate rarely listens to men like him. While Lucas Ward was scrubbing dishes in the quiet corners of Leonard, another man ruled from the top of a glass tower that kissed the clouds. Ethan Crowell, 45, the founder and CEO of Crowell Industries, a $12 billion empire built from the ashes of his father's bankrupt textile company. To the world, Ethan was a legend of business, a strategist who could turn failing markets into gold with a single decision. But behind the immaculate suits and flawless interviews lived a man haunted by everything success had taken away. 2 marriages had collapsed under the weight of ambition. His younger brother, Daniel, had died in a skiing accident while Ethan was closing a merger in Tokyo. He hadn't even made it back in time for the funeral. Since then, guilt had become his shadow, following him through every victory. whispering that every triumph came with a cost. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city, yet felt emptier than any motel room he had ever stayed in. His dinner table had 12 seats, but only one plate. Every night, he poured himself a drink he rarely finished, staring at the skyline as if expecting an answer from the lights below. The only person who managed to pierce the armor was Madison Hale. At 33, she was more than just his executive assistant. She was the rhythm that kept his empire alive. Efficient, calm, and unshakable. She could silence a boardroom with a glance and dissolve a lawsuit with a single phone call. In a world of noise, Madison was quiet control personified. She never raised her voice, never lost her composure, and never let emotion interfere with logic. Her reputation within the company was flawless, but her private life was a locked vault. Few knew that beneath the crisp suits and careful poise was a woman who once believed in love. A long time ago, she had been engaged to a banker named Andrew Sinclair, who promised her forever and left her with nothing but a canceled wedding and a shattered sense of trust. From that day, Madison decided emotions were liabilities, so she buried hers under schedules, spreadsheets, and 12-hour workdays. Every morning, she arrived before Ethan. Every night, she left after him. She knew his habits better than he did. The exact moment he would need coffee, when he would start pacing, when silence meant fury and when it meant fatigue. They never crossed professional lines, but their silence often said more than words could. In some unspoken way, they both understood loneliness disguised as success. To outsiders, Ethan and Madison looked unstoppable, two forces of precision driving the same machine. But those who watched closely could see it, the way his gaze lingered a moment too long when she left the room, the way her hands trembled slightly when he thanked her for something simple. Two people at the height of power, both brilliant, both broken in their own ways, orbiting the same emptiness. Neither realized that fate had already started weaving their thread toward the man in the waiter's uniform whose story was about to collide with theirs. Thursday nights at Leonard were usually predictable. The air hummed with the low murmur of deals being made over aged whiskey, and the lighting was soft enough to make ambition look elegant. Ethan Crowell sat at his usual corner table with 3 Japanese investors, a glass of Yamazaki in his hand, and Madison Hale to his left, reviewing the figures that could decide the next phase of his empire. To anyone watching, it was another night of power and poise. Until the door opened. They walked in with the confidence of men who didn't belong but didn't care. 3 figures dressed in dark coats, faces blank, movements synchronized. A hostess tried to greet them, but one look froze the words in her throat. In seconds, the calm of the restaurant shattered like glass. One attacker reached for something beneath his jacket. The first scream came from a table of tourists, and chairs scraped violently across marble as panic spread. Madison turned just in time to see the man nearest to Ethan grab him by his lapels and drag him from his chair, whiskey spilling in a golden arc. Her own chair tipped over as she fell backward, her head striking the floor. The chaos unfolding in strobe flashes of motion and sound. Ethan struggled, trying to twist free, but the second man drove a knee into his ribs. The third circled behind, blocking every exit with the precision of a predator. And then, from the far side of the room, Lucas Ward moved. He had been polishing glasses at the service station, invisible as always, when instinct flared like lightning in his veins. No hesitation, no thought, just pure, ingrained reaction. His steps were silent, his expression unreadable. The first attacker never saw him coming. Lucas struck once, a precise palm hit to the solar plexus. The man collapsed, gasping for air, already unconscious before he hit the floor. The second spun toward him, swinging wildly, but Lucas was already inside his reach. A quick shift, an elbow to the jaw, a sweep of the leg, down, controlled, unharmed but done. The third man's hand vanished inside his coat. A weapon. Maybe. Lucas didn't wait to find out. His foot connected with the man's wrist, a sharp crack echoing through the chaos, sending the object a knife sliding across the floor. A follow-up strike to the chest and the man folded. 4 seconds. That was all it took. Silence filled the space where screams had been. The sound of a single wine glass spinning on the marble floor became deafening in its perfection. Diners froze, breathless, staring at the man who had just neutralized 3 armed attackers as easily as if he'd caught falling dishes. When the police arrived minutes later, Lucas stood exactly where he had stopped, his hands loose at his sides, breathing steady, shirt still tucked in, no boasting, no panic, just quiet control. He answered questions in clipped, simple phrases. Yes, he had intervened. No, he didn't know them. Yes, everyone was safe. And as flashlights flickered across his calm face, no one could decide what was more shocking, the fight itself or the unshakable composure of the man who ended it. By morning, the video was everywhere. It opened every news channel, trended on every platform, dissected frame by analysts who tried to guess the identity of the man in the waiter's uniform. The headlines called him the Ghost Guardian. Some said he was ex-military. Others claimed he was a trained bodyguard. People speculated, glorified, and romanticized. But the man himself wanted none of it. Lucas Ward didn't check his phone that morning. He had walked Lily to school like every other day, stopping for coffee from the corner cart, humming to the rhythm of her chatter about spelling tests and school lunches. He didn't realize that half the parents around them were whispering, showing the video to one another. To them, he was a hero hiding in plain sight. To him, he was just a father trying to keep his daughter's world safe. That afternoon, when Lily came home, her face glowed with a strange mix of pride and confusion. She held up a tablet, eyes wide. "Daddy, is this you?" she asked. The screen showed him grainy footage from behind, his movements clean, lethal, and precise. The title read, "The Waiter Who Took Down 3 Killers in 4 Seconds." Lucas froze for a heartbeat. He could see his reflection in her eyes, part soldier, part father, entirely human. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. "That's me, but it wasn't a big deal. I just helped someone who needed help, like when we helped Mrs. Jenkins carry her groceries." Lily frowned, unconvinced. Then she wrapped her arms around him, tiny fingers gripping his shirt with all the certainty in the world. "I knew it," she whispered. "You're a superhero." Lucas laughed quietly, but there was a catch in his voice. "Maybe just a tired one," he said, holding her close. For the first time in years, the armor around his heart cracked not from pain, but from love too pure to hide behind walls. 2 days later, the fall air had turned golden. In the small park behind their apartment, Lucas pushed Lily's swing as leaves rustled around them. That was when Madison Hale appeared. No chauffeur, no designer coat, just a woman in jeans and uncertainty. She spotted him instantly, the man whose face she had seen only under crisis lights. "Mr. Ward," she said softly when she was close enough, "I wanted to thank you properly." He glanced at her, noting how out of place she looked among the squeals of children and the smell of wood chips. "No thanks necessary," he replied. Steady and polite, Lily twisted in her swing to look at the stranger, her eyes curious. "I'm Lily," she announced proudly. "This is my dad. He's really strong." For the first time since the night of the attack, Madison smiled a genuine, unguarded smile that made her look years younger. She introduced herself, her tone both formal and tender. "It's very nice to meet you, Lily. Your dad is quite remarkable." Something shifted then. A brief silence. A glance held too long, a recognition of shared loneliness and unspoken gratitude. They didn't know it yet, but this quiet meeting in the park would start something neither of them had been ready for. A connection that would slowly heal the fractures in both their lives. 3 days after the park meeting, an envelope arrived at Lucas Ward's apartment, thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the silver insignia of Crowell Industries. Inside was a letter written with corporate precision, a formal invitation to meet Ethan Crowell at the company's Manhattan headquarters. The wording was polite, but carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Most people would have taken it as an honor. Lucas read it once, folded it carefully, and sighed. 2 days later, he stood in the lobby of Crowell Tower, a monument of glass and ambition piercing the skyline. He wore his only suit, a black jacket slightly too tight across the shoulders, a relic from his days in uniform. The receptionist's eyes flicked up, momentarily surprised that this quiet, broad-shouldered man was the one the CEO had personally summoned. Upstairs, the executive floor felt more like an art gallery than an office. White marble floors, sculptures that didn't make sense but screamed wealth. Behind a desk the size of a small car stood Ethan Crowell, sharp as ever, yet somehow smaller without the boardroom around him. Madison Hale was there too, standing beside the window, composed, observant. "Mr. Ward," Ethan began, his voice calm but rehearsed. "I appreciate you coming. Let's get straight to it." He gestured toward a sleek briefcase on the table. "This is a token of gratitude. $100,000. No strings attached, and," he slid a folder forward, "a confidentiality agreement to protect your privacy and mine." Lucas looked at the briefcase, then back at Ethan. His expression didn't change. "You want me to keep quiet?" Ethan nodded. "The media loves a hero, Mr. Ward. They also love tearing one down. I'd prefer this story to fade quietly." Lucas was silent for a moment. He didn't look angry, just tired. "I don't want your money," he said finally. His tone wasn't defiant, only certain. "I just want to go home to my daughter. Safe. Every night. That's enough." For a man used to negotiating billion-dollar contracts, Ethan Crowell found himself speechless. He'd met men who would sell their integrity for a smaller sum. He'd bought silence before, loyalty too, but not this. Not honesty without a price tag. He leaned back slowly, studying the man across from him like an equation that didn't balance. "You're a rare breed, Mr. Ward," he said at last. "Not really," Lucas replied. "Just a father." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy with understanding. For the first time in years, Ethan saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, a version of himself before the world taught him to equate success with sacrifice. Madison had been quiet the entire time, but her gaze never left Lucas. When he turned to leave, she caught his eyes briefly, just long enough for him to notice something behind the professional mask. It wasn't pity, it was respect, maybe even something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. As the elevator doors closed, Ethan stood still, his hand resting on the briefcase that suddenly felt heavier than its worth. Madison spoke softly, more to herself than to him. "He's not like the others." Ethan nodded slowly. "No," he admitted. "He's exactly what the rest of us forgot how to be." For a brief moment, peace seemed possible. The chaos at Leonard had faded from the headlines, and Ethan Crowell returned to his empire as if nothing had happened. But beneath the calm, something darker stirred. The police investigation revealed a truth that money and influence could no longer bury. The three attackers weren't random criminals. They were hired guns connected to a rival corporation that Ethan's ruthless takeover had destroyed 2 years earlier. The man behind that company had lost everything. A month later, he was found dead in his office, a gun in his hand, and hatred still carved into his final words. The attack had been revenge, and it wasn't over. 2 weeks after the revelation, Ethan's penthouse windows shattered at dawn. A bullet embedded itself in the chair where he had been sitting moments earlier. The sniper was gone before the alarms finished screaming. That morning, Ethan didn't call his legal team or his security chief. He called Lucas Ward. The line connected after 2 rings. "I need your help," Ethan said, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "This isn't a request, it's survival." Lucas listened quietly. His answer was simple. "If I do this," he said, "I do it my way. No money, no contracts. You follow my rules, or you find someone else." There was a pause, then a sigh of surrender. "You have my word." By nightfall, Lucas walked into Crowell Tower again. This time not as a guest, but as a strategist. His demeanor changed, his eyes sharper, posture precise, every step measured. The soldier had returned. He reviewed the company's security files and saw flaws everywhere. Predictable patterns, vulnerable entry points. Guards who looked the part but had never faced a real threat. Within hours, he tore down the entire system and rebuilt it from the ground up. He wasn't alone. Madison Hale worked beside him, translating corporate chaos into structure he could navigate. She had never seen this version of him before: cold focus, complete command. But there was something else beneath the discipline: kindness. He treated every guard with respect, every worker like they mattered. In return, they began to trust him, even the ones who doubted him at first. Late nights turned into early mornings. Plans, blueprints, and surveillance feeds replaced small talk. Between strategy meetings, they shared fragments of themselves: grief, fear, pieces of lives they had both tried to bury. Madison learned about Claire, the wife he'd lost. Lucas learned about the fiancé who had betrayed her. They didn't talk about love, but something between them started to shift, an unspoken understanding that both had lived through pain and still chose to protect others instead of hardening completely. Ethan watched them from a distance, realizing that for the first time in years, two people were in his office who didn't want anything from him. They simply wanted to keep him alive. One night, as Lucas adjusted the new perimeter drones, Madison handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed, and for an instant, the air between them held something fragile but real. She smiled faintly. "You don't sleep much, do you?" "Not when people I care about might die," he said simply. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not because of walls or cameras, but because of him. The plan was simple, but deadly. Lucas Ward leaked false information through compromised corporate channels about a secret board meeting scheduled at Ethan Crowell's private estate in Westchester. It was bait, polished to perfection. Every piece of intel suggested that Ethan and his key executives would be gathered under one roof with minimal security. In reality, only 3 people knew the truth: Ethan, Madison, and Lucas himself. By midnight, the estate slept under a full moon, surrounded by trees that whispered with the wind. Security lights flickered along the driveway, their glow soft and deliberate, guiding eyes toward what Lucas wanted them to see. Inside, Ethan paced the study, tense but obedient. Madison sat quietly near the monitors, her face pale in the bluish light of surveillance screens. Lucas stood by the window, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the fence. He didn't have to say it aloud. He felt them coming. At 2:03 a.m., the Figan movement appeared on the northern perimeter. 7 figures, coordinated, silent, moving like ghosts through the dark. Lucas zoomed in on the thermal feed and saw the lead man's face: Silas Kane, former Crowell Industries security chief, dismissed years ago for selling secrets to a competitor. A man with a soldier's discipline and a traitor's heart. "They're here," Lucas said quietly. He ushered Ethan and Madison into the reinforced safe room, then activated the trap. Certain doors locked automatically while others stayed invitingly open, leading the intruders exactly where he wanted them. As he stepped into the hall, he checked his watch. 2 minutes until contact. The first 2 men never had the chance to react. Lucas moved like smoke, his strike surgical, his breathing steady. A knife twisted from one hand. A silenced pistol fell from another. No killing shots, only incapacitation, swift and clean. The third man spotted him, shouted a warning, and chaos erupted. Gunfire ripped through the hallway, shredding portraits and shattering glass. Lucas ducked behind a marble column, drew his combat knife, and waited for the muzzle flashes to guide him. When they did, he moved fast, precise, unstoppable. A blur of motion, a grunt, a thud, then silence again. But Silas Kane was different. He wanted Lucas alive long enough to suffer. When their eyes met across the foyer, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Silas smiled, lifting his weapon. "You should have stayed in the shadows. Soldier," he hissed. "I live there," Lucas replied. The fight that followed was brutal and unrelenting. Fists, knees, shattered furniture, blood against marble. Both men were trained to win, both refused to lose. Silas fought with hatred, Lucas fought with purpose. When Silas drew a knife, Lucas deflected the blade, twisting his arm until bone cracked, but he didn't kill him. A precise chokehold sent Silas into unconsciousness, his body collapsing with the dull thud of final defeat. Breathing hard, Lucas leaned against the wall. the echo of gunfire still trembling through his bones. The sirens were distant now, backup arriving too late for the war that had already ended. From the shadows of the corridor, Madison Hale appeared. Her eyes widened at the sight of his bloodied shirt. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, pressing a cloth against the wound on his arm. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I've had worse," he said, managing a faint smile. Her hands trembled as she tied the bandage, her voice breaking softly. "Thank you, Lucas, for stopping it, for not letting the darkness make you one of them." He met her gaze, steady and quiet. "Someone has to stay human," he said. Outside, dawn was beginning to break. The light fell across the estate like forgiveness. The battle at Crowell Estate made headlines across the nation. Reporters called it the night the empire nearly fell. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded, and for once, Ethan Crowell stood before the media not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man who had almost lost everything. With Madison by his side, he publicly thanked Lucas Ward, calling him a protector whose courage reminded me of humanity beyond power. The crowd wanted a photo, a handshake, a contract story. But Lucas wanted none of it. He stood at the edge of the stage, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, declining the lucrative job and cash reward Ethan offered. "I already have a job," he said quietly. "Being a father." After the chaos faded, life began to rebuild itself, slowly, gently. Madison Hale started visiting the small apartment in Queens. At first, it was to drop off files or check on Ethan's security details, but soon she stayed longer. She helped Lily with her math homework, cooked pasta with Lucas, and laughed more than she had in years. The air around them softened. Lily, full of mischief and warmth, began her secret mission to make Madison stay. She drew family pictures with 3 people and proudly taped them to the fridge. She asked Madison to join movie nights and whispered to her father, "She makes the house smell like Mom's candles." And little by little, between dinners that stretched into laughter and quiet nights filled with stories, love returned not like a thunderclap, but like sunlight creeping through the cracks after a long, endless storm. Under the blooming arches of the botanical garden, Lucas Ward and Madison Hale exchanged vows where little Lily once whispered, "I want her to be my mom." The ceremony was small and full of warmth. Ethan Crowell wiped away a tear, and Mrs. Chen wept openly as Lily shouted, "Now I have a mom." They moved into a cozy new apartment filled with laughter and second chances, Lucas teaching self-defense at the community center, Madison working as a consultant, and love quietly anchoring their everyday life. Years later, Lily Ward grew into a brilliant young woman, accepted into an engineering program to build things that help people. Ethan Crowell remained their loyal Uncle Ethan, sharing dinners and laughter. On Lily's 18th birthday, she smiled and said, "I wish we could always stay like this." Lucas looked at Madison, eyes soft with pride. "We already have," he whispered. In their warm kitchen, surrounded by light and love, they proved that true strength isn't in battle, but in the courage to love and protect what matters most. If this story touched your heart, a tale of courage, family, and second chances, give it a like. Share it with someone who believes in love after loss, and subscribe for more powerful life stories that warm the soul.